communications, who develop skills related to administration, financial management. Uh, you wouldn't have thought of some things like leadership. So these are certain soft skills which you develop when you are running a project. You get in-depth knowledge in the topic what you are doing research on. It improves your CV. As a student, as a fellow, when you apply even for a fellowship, they look at how many papers you have published, how many grants you have written. So it definitely helps in improving your CV. And it's a genuine chance to make a difference to your patients. So definitely doing research is beneficial, and it gives you an opportunity to interact with numerous people throughout the world, and also to see the world, and if you're funded on funded money. So definitely there are advantages of doing research, and I would suggest each and every one of us, especially the students, make a beginning in starting to do some research, small or big. So how to design a study? So most of us would have seen this slide before. There are numerous types of study designs which can be used, and this is the hierarchy of evidence which each of these study designs give. And systematic reviews are supposed to be on top, which is sometimes debatable nowadays. It might not be considered so always. Then comes the clinical trials, which are the randomized clinical trials. Then there are cohort studies, case control studies, case series or case reports, and certain opinions, which are supposed to be anecdotal. So, how do you choose the right study design? So, that would depend on multiple things, but mainly you would be considering these things. So, the research question, what you're trying to answer, what is the clinical question or the dilemma you're trying to solve, that would guide the most relevant study design in most of the times. Sometimes the available budget, you could design a very good study to give the excellent results, but you might not have the relevant funding. So you would have to do some compromise. You might not have the available resources. Certain particular type of investigation which you want to do might not be available in your institute, or might not be available in your particular locality itself. So resources might be a problem. Available time. Some diseases take time to develop, so you cannot probably choose one particular type of study design in such situations. And there could be certain ethical issues in using a particular study design, especially an RCT. So these five things mainly would guide you what type of study design you would be choosing. So how would you ascertain what is the type of study design? So by you could do that by asking four questions. First, when you look at a study, when you're reading a research study for your journal club or uh, a paper as such, you should ask whether there was an intervention being done. So what is an intervention? It could be a medicine, it could be a drug, vaccine, injection. It could be just educational intervention, even that is considered to be an intervention. So, was an intervention assigned? So, you are going to assign the intervention. Are you going to assign? So, if yes, then it is called as an experimental study. So, if it is an experimental study, or also called as an intervention study, you ask the second question: was there random allocation? That means where the participants chosen to go into either of the arms randomly by a way of random allocation. If yes, then it becomes a randomized clinical trial or an RCT. And if the allocation is not random, then it is called as a non-randomized controlled trial. Now, if the first for the first question, if the answer is no, that means there is no intervention being given, then it would be a observation study. That means you're just going to observe without actively giving an intervention. So you are not actively giving any sort of intervention, then it becomes an observational study. So in an observation study, then you ask the third question: is there a comparison group? So comparison group or a control arm. So if there is no control arm, then it becomes a descriptive study. So here you would only be describing the population under study without any comparisons. So if there is a comparison arm or a control arm, then it becomes an analytical study. That means you're doing an analysis, you're comparing one group versus other, then it becomes an analytical study. Then you ask the fourth question, what is the direction of exposure? So are you going from exposure to outcome? Then it becomes a cohort study. Are you going from outcome to exposure? Then it becomes a case control study. Or are you going to look at the exposure and outcome at the same time? Then it becomes a cross-sectional study. So this one slide gives you the whole study design. What are all the study designs? What could be possibly used? So now briefly going into the considerations while choosing the study design. So let me start with the RCT because most of our ophthalmology journal clubs are filled with RCTs and it is one of a very strong study designs and I like it very much. So I will begin with this. So RCTs are randomized controlled trials. Before that, has anyone seen this picture before? I mean, Dr. Anuj, are people going to answer? Or,
Yeah, you can definitely.
yeah. So, could anyone say if they've seen this picture? This is a very common picture seen in many medical colleges. Has anyone seen this picture before? So, I guess not. So, I will move forward. So, there's a clue here. Someone is eating a lemon here. So, so this is Dr. James Lind. So he's considered as the father of clinical trials. So he was sailing on this boat called a ship called as Salisbury. So they were sailing to India, and he observed that many patients, many sailors on board developed a unique condition where there was bleeding in the gums, bleeding in the subcutaneous tissue. At that point in time, nobody knew what this disease was, which we now call it as scurvy. So what he did was the treatment for this condition was not known then. So what he did was he took 12 of these sailors who had scurvy. He gave them six different uh, treatments randomly, and then he observed them at the end of 1 week. The people who got treatment six improved. So he considered it is because of treatment, which was lemon juice, and and that is why he started advocating use of lemon juice for prevention and treatment of scurvy. So this is supposed to be one of the very first intervention studies, although it was not a randomized clinical trial. It does not have the very important features of an RCT, it is still considered one of the very early intervention studies, and he's called the father of clinical trials. So, the modern clinical trials or an ideal clinical trial should have all of these three features mainly. That is, they should be controlled, it should be unbiased, and it should be large. So, what are these three things? What's the meaning of control? So, their control means there is a comparison arm. And what could be the comparison? It could be another treatment, like a new treatment versus a standard treatment. You would have read numerous RCTs, especially when it comes to retina and VEGF trials. So always there is either a placebo or there is a another drug which is being compared with. So that is the control arm. So why do we actually need a control arm? So could we just do it on one arm itself? So now this is an example. Now there are people here. We are considering people with depression here, and you give a drug, and you want to see if they improve or not, and you're not comparing with anything else, but you're just looking at this one group of people, say people with depression, and you observe them after giving an intervention. So would this make sense? So yes, what are the reasons for the improvement? The improvement could have happened because of the intervention itself, or it could be any of these. There could be a natural improvement over time. Or maybe you would have selected people who are going to improve, like those people who are younger, who are, say, more active physically. You sort of unconsciously select a certain group of people. There is some sort of selection bias here. That is why they improve. Or the patient feels that they have taken a drug And because they've taken a drug, their symptoms start improving, and that is called as the placebo effect. Or there is something called as the Hawthorne effect. That is, the patients know that they are being observed, they are under the study, and so they modify their behavior. They become teetotalers, they abstain from drugs, and that is why the symptoms improve. So you cannot pinpoint at one particular reason why their symptoms improve just by looking at one group of patients without a comparison group. So this is another example. This is a RITA 2 trial where angioplasty was done, and they observed that 9.4% people died because of angioplasty. So just by looking at this, can we say that angioplasty is associated with death? So we probably cannot say that. So unless we compare it with the standard group. So if the standard group, 7.6% people died, and here 9.4% people died, although it looks slightly higher, but when you do a statistical analysis, it was not statistically significant. So you can conclude that one treatment is as good as the other, or as maybe worse than the other, or better than the other, only by comparing with a control arm. So another design is RCTs are unbiased. So what do you mean by unbiased? The group on which patients are selected into group intervention group and control group, they need to be similar. So are these people, one group is young and other group is old, so these two groups are not comparable. But if you use randomization, that is a way in which both your known and unknown risk factors are balanced between the groups, you get groups which are very similar to each other if your randomization has been done correctly. So randomization is the key feature of a clinical trial. And here allocation takes place only by chance. So there is no preconceived higher chance of one patient being allocated to one particular group. So what it ensures is that the comparison groups are very similar to each other in most in all known and even unknown aspects. Sometimes we don't really know the risk factors for certain conditions uh, right now, which we might be discovering very much later. So, in such, when you do a randomization, all those unknown risk factors also get balanced between the uh, trial arms. So, by randomization, if you use the correct randomization methods, then both the groups become similar. So, what do I mean by saying correct randomization methods? So, there are other ways, say that you call patients, all patients who come on Monday will go to treatment A, whereas those patients who go on Tuesday go to treatment B. Is that a good way of randomizing? Probably not, because there could be ways in which a selection bias could take place. Say, Monday, we have a retina surgeon who comes to visit the particular clinic, and most of the retina patients enter the OPD on a Monday. So, if you select in such a way, it becomes a non-random way of selecting the population. So, randomization methods are ensure that there is, yeah. So it ensures that there is a equal distribution of the risk factors. So the example what I gave would be a non-random method, which would again lead to a bias. Another important issue is clinical trials need to be large. So you cannot do a clinical trial on 5 patients, 2 patients, 3 patients, because if the randomization has to work, then we need a larger sample, and the large sample size is based on the calculations. So you cannot do a randomized clinical trial on a very small sample. Now, there are certain ethical considerations for randomization. So, if, for example, if you're doing, you want to know if smoking leads to lung cancer, say passive smoking. So, can you design a RCT for this? Can you, being the doctor, say that few people get exposed to smoking and other people do not get exposed to smoking, and we will go and see after 10 years how many develop lung cancer. So this won't be something ethical. So there are not every condition you can do a clinical trial. So observational studies are important, but observational studies have their problems. So this was one observational study called as the Women's Health Initiative, where postmenopausal women were given who were taking hormone replacement therapy were studied over a period of time, and they saw that women who took this hormone replacement or HRT, they had reduced heart disease, and they concluded that HRT is good. But after done, and they saw that people who took HRT actually had increased risk of heart disease. So you're getting two different results on the same question. So why is it so? So I told you the key clinical key is that they are controlled, they're unbiased, and they're large. So all three things need to be there. But when it's an observational study, it can be controlled, it can be large, but you can never randomize an observational study because you are not going to intervene yourself. Only people who have taken a hormone replacement therapy, you have observed them. You have not given them, or you have not selected who is going to get the hormone replacement therapy. Observational studies are never randomized, and because of this, certain biases creep in. So prospective, the studies, observation studies could be retrospective or prospective. So prospective means looking forward. So these are like from exposure to outcome, or it could be retrospective, where you start with the disease, look at lung cancer, no lung cancer patients, and go backward in time and look at the risk factors. Cross-sectional studies are the risk factors and the outcome are seen at one particular time. So, if you're doing a cross-section study and say that you're studying how many people had diarrhea in a particular institution, so this becomes a descriptive cross-section study. But if this can also be analytical. So, if you compare among these students who had diarrhea or gastroenteritis, how many ate in the hostel, how many did not eat in the hostel. So, you're doing some analysis, then it is called as a analytical cross-sectional study. Now, if you're studying, does coffee drinking lead to heart disease? And you are doing a cross-section study and you get these results. You say that drinking coffee once a day leads to 11% heart disease, twice a day, 24%, more than three times a day, 49%. So there is a sort of a dose response you're seeing here. As the number of coffees are increasing, the number of heart disease, the percentage of heart disease is also increasing. So by this cross-section study, can we conclude that coffee drinking is associated with the heart disease, or does it cause? Is it causal? Can we conclude that? So before answering that, let us go back to the RCT. And if we were to do RCT on the same question, does coffee drinking cause heart disease? How would you design that? You would take people, randomly allocate them to coffee, another group, randomly allocate them who will not have coffee, observe them over a period of time, and then see how many develop heart disease. So in this, the baseline is comparable because you have randomly allocated without any predetermined motion. So randomly you're allocating. So the baseline is the patient participants are very similar, and you observe and you see how many develop. So if you see that maybe heart disease is more among coffee drinkers, then you can say probably that it is because of, it could be because of coffee drinking, but there could be a certain uh, other explanations to this. So, what is the other explanation or alternate explanation? So, one explanation is coffee drinking actually gives rise to heart disease, or coffee drinking is associated with something else, and that something else is associated with heart disease. And this is called as confounding. So, say, is coffee drinking confounded with smoking? So, if you look at the numbers here, as the number of coffees are increasing, the number of cigarettes per day is also increasing. So, coffee drinking is associated with smoking here. And if you see smoking, association of smoking with heart disease, as the number of cigarettes increase per day, again, the heart disease is increasing per day. So the smoking is associated with heart disease. So the alternate explanation is coffee drinking is associated with smoking, and smoking leads to heart disease. And that is why there is no direct association between coffee drinking and heart disease, and the association is because of the confounder, which is smoking. So that is an alternate explanation. Now, in case control studies, I told you it starts with the cases. So, cases are those people who have the disease, and control are those people who do not have the disease. So, what do we do here is we go back in time and ask how many of them were exposed. So, the rationale here is if exposure is more common among the deceased, then it can be interpreted as disease is more common among exposed. So, you start with the cases and the controls, and you see how many are exposed in the cases, how many are exposed in the controls. So again, the same example, patients with heart disease, how many are coffee drinkers? Patients without heart disease, how many are coffee drinkers? But again, the same biases would still play here. So another example is patients with breast cancer and alcohol association. Uh, and again, you see how many of patients without breast cancer are associated, have history of alcohol intake. So here, an important issue is selection of the control group. So if you choose a control group, which is probably not the right type of control group, say you're taking women who are attending an accidents and emergency department of the hospital as the control group for breast cancer patients without breast cancer, then this group is probably not a good one to select because the control group might be more associated with alcohol consumption, and that is why they're ending up with accidents in the emergency department. So it's not a good control group to select. So here something called as a selection bias has happened. Recall bias, because we told we are going back in time and asking them, the patients, if they were exposed to a particular thing or not. Example, you take lung cancer patients and you ask them 20 years back, were you exposed to asbestos? So people who have lung cancers are more likely to recall than people without lung cancer that they had an exposure. So there is something called as a recall bias which creeps in. Then there is something called as an observer bias. So you're doing a case control study here. You're looking at BCG vaccine and its protective effect, and you know that this particular patient has developed TB, and you look at the scar and you think that probably it's not a BCG scar. So then you sort of get biased because you know that the patient has TB and he's probably did not have a BCG vaccine. Even though you're seeing a scar, you might be more inclined to say that it is not a BCG scar. So this is what a observer bias is. So in cohort studies, I told the direction is from exposure to outcome. So you start with the exposure. So how many you start with smokers and non-smokers, and then you see how many develop the disease or not. So the advantage of this is that you're starting with the exposure. So you know at this point in time that the disease has not occurred and they're developing disease much later. So the exposure has preceded the outcome. But these cohort studies take long time to develop the outcome. So it might not be a good idea to do cohort studies for all conditions. So again, this is the passive smoking and lung cancer example. So start with the exposure, which is passive smoking or no passive smoking, and then you see how many develop lung cancer in both the groups and then compare. So while interpreting observational studies, we should be very careful. We should always ask, could there be any of these biases? Could there be confounding? Could the observed results be just because of random chance? And if there is an association, is the association causal? So when you're especially analyzing or critiquing a article, these are some of the things what you have to look in each of the, uh, especially for an observational study. So this is a very brief overview, and thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Dr. Anuj, once again.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Saujanya. I think that was really extensive, and we tried to cover everything. I think these points which you mentioned, right, three main points generally what as residents and generally we get confused is between randomization and bias and is confounding factors. So I think that you have covered very nicely and the way you describe. So I think if anyone has any doubts, because Dr. Saujanya is here and we can utilize more time with her. So can go ahead with any questions if you have. Okay, so the as a resident or as a someone who is in clinical practice, uh, what do you feel is the best form of research? Not in terms of the hierarchy, because obviously you said a randomized control trial, but to start, what do you suggest? Case control study or just case series or how should one go about it?
I guess as residents, we see a lot of clinical cases and interesting cases. Maybe it's a good idea to start writing case reports. It might not be a very high level of evidence, as you mentioned, but it will definitely give you how to write a research paper. It will give you at least a basic format, how to go through reading a research paper, doing a literature review, for writing even a case report. A short case report also takes a lot of effort, and I guess you should start with a case report. And if you're doing a MS or DNB, a research thesis would be involved, and that could be any of the study designs. Usually RCTs are not done as residents, because there are clinical, ethical issues with RCTs, and obviously funding is also required most of the times for doing RCTs. But other observation studies or cross-section studies also could be done as residents, probably, and even case control, small case control studies can also be done as residents.
I think this ethical issue which you mentioned, that is a very important point. Though in India, it tends to be, I think, just a formality, the ethical this. But I remember during my thesis, the proposal got rejected by the ethical committee. And that was a sort of a shocker and a rare thing because nobody knew now how to go about it because it was supposed to be just a formality. And that point was very interesting, which they made because we were doing two interventions. We were comparing a superior phaco trap with a temporal phaco trap. And they asked, how many temporal phaco traps are you doing? And the
Mhm.
answer was zero. So they said because of this study, now your patients are going to be undergoing temporal phacotrap, which you are not doing.
Huh.
So how is it ethical? Because only because they are in the study, they are going, and neither your surgeon, it is a preferred choice. So it was a really difficult time because we had already submitted to the national board, the university. So then we had to collect data from other surgeons and this, that it is a proven this. And so this ethical point is very
Yeah.
important, which,
Is something which I think all the ethics committees look for.
right.
First, like first principle is do no harm.
No, no, no,
Yes.
absolutely.
So if you can justify it that it's a, well-known uh, type of surgery with very low incidence of complications with relevant literature, it shouldn't be a problem.
Right. Okay. So the other thing is generally when residents they get in touch with me is that they said now I have written this case report, but it got rejected. So can you just how to deal with rejection and because generally it is not just a rejection. They are generally they give the reasons. They tell what is this is the point. So, but as what will be your tips like how to deal with rejection and how to go about it.
I guess rejection is part of your life. In every point in time, you get rejected, and it's an opportunity to learn, probably. And not only as a resident, as even a senior consultant, you will get rejected.
Right.
So I think first thing is to go and see what are the questions, what are the critical points they are raising, because the reviewers also, it won't be usually one reviewer, so there will be two reviewers who will be seeing that, and there will be an editor, an academic editor, or the main editor itself who would be reviewing. So three people have gone through this and they've given some points. So I guess what we should do as a author on a paper is to first address those issues, consult with maybe seniors or colleagues, and then maybe discuss it and maybe submit again. So probably most of the times you'll be submitting to another journal, and uh, I mean, discussing why you got rejected is important. Sometimes there are some points which you cannot address. So there is a main problem in your design itself. So then most of the times you cannot do anything about it. So I would like to share one of my rejections. I mean, I learned it very late. So we had used a questionnaire which was available online freely, but actually it was a copyrighted questionnaire which I wasn't aware at that point in time. So I still have that study, and I cannot publish it anyway because it's a copyrighted thing, and I cannot use a copyrighted questionnaire without permission, although it's available online freely. So these are some things which you learn over time, and the next time you're more careful about such things.
The other thing is like, as you said, going to other journals once you have a rejection. So generally, what residents ask is what we know about these predatory journals, or it is an easy process,
Yeah.
or maybe a non this it is not an index journal. So should that be like, as a first step, should we encourage, or it should be a strict no?
No, I think it's a strict no. I mean, you can just write it and maybe do a journal club in your own institute instead of submitting to a predatory journal. Uh, I mean, why encourage something which is not right,
Right,
first of all? Even if you get it published there, nobody is going to read that. So what's the point in getting it published? And even if even if it's there on your CV that you have published, say, 10 articles in predatory journals, a person who is sitting on your interview panel will know what type of journal you have submitted it. So it's not going to add any value. So I don't see any advantage of publishing in I mean, such a journal.
right. So the next question is, because right, in India as such, for jobs, the CV does not practically does not add much unless you are going in an institute. And in some places, like in government setup, it is a direct point system, that it
Yes.
is a tick mark. Whether
Yes.
it is, yes, it has some criteria that it has to be an index journal or this, but if you have a publication, it is a tick
Yes.
mark. Obviously, the hierarchy is there. So, but as you said, that it should be avoided, because it is not going to
Yeah.
add.
I mean, point taken. That
Yeah.
is definitely the case. I mean, but I guess the rules will change, and it is in a evolutionary period. So, can a good journal? I mean, I
Ma'am,
think
I
we
have
should
a
all
doubt.
try for that. Yeah,
Ma'am, as a beginner, how to proceed with case report, ma'am?
with a case report. Yes. So,
Ma'am,
all your, I mean, first thing is to read other articles, other case reports. If you're selecting a particular case, so read the articles, case reports, guidelines. So some journals will specifically say if it's a case report, no more than five references you can use. It depends upon the journal you submit.
Okay.
So most of the journals, I mean, the format would be very similar. So there is a introduction, there is a method section, there is a results section, and there is a conclusion. So these headings don't change, but the number of words which are used and the formatting would change. So it's a good idea to read the your target journal before submitting or before even writing the case report.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more question. I think, doctor, you can go ahead and ask directly question through the mic. So I'll ask the question. It is how should one go for research in first year? What will be the ideal way to go? I will be joining ophthalmology soon. So this is so you're already in medical background and so yes.
So I guess if you're, I mean, as a resident, you will be doing some research because you have to do a dissertation, and now it is compulsory for you to attend number of research-related trainings now. So one of the trainings is from NPTEL, that is something called as SWAYAM from Government of India. So there are videos which you need to see, and you need to give an exam on this also. It is a mandatory requirement for clearing your MS nowadays. So, and each of the colleges conduct this research methodology course. So it's a short course, around 2 to 3 days, uh, and most colleges do conduct this. So you will have to attend that. And some things are learned with experience by talking to your senior colleagues, your teachers, by discussing with others, and maybe attending if you're very much interested in doing more of research over and above your requirement for your MS, then it's a good idea to get in touch with someone whom you look up to. Maybe if there is a particular field in which you want to do research, identify a person who does research in that particular field, and maybe talk to them, and maybe you can do some additional research in on top of what is mandatory for your MS.
So one more question is
Thank you,
generally,
ma'am.
yeah, please go ahead, someone.
I think she
Yes,
was just
doctor.
typing.
Hello.
So other question generally as residents they ask is the impact factor when choosing. Would you what will be your suggestion on this?
Uh, I mean, I could say that impact factor is not important because we are not really supposed to look at impact factor, but we all do look at impact factors when we are publishing ourselves. Uh, but especially when you're beginning with, uh, it might not be feasible also sometimes to publish a very high impact factor journal. So most of the journals nowadays are those with high impact factor nowadays are not open access.
Right.
So it becomes especially the international journals are very expensive. So it's around 2000 US dollars. So very expensive. So if you can afford it, why not try it? I mean, you can. There is certain journals are hybrid journals. That means you have an option of open access. That means you pay and make your article open, that anyone can click on the article and can read the full text. Or there is a subscription based. That means only people who have subscription to the journal or who can pay for each article and subscribe to that full text. So if it is a hybrid journal, or a subscription based journal, the authors need not pay money to get published. But it won't, not everyone can access the journal. They'll be able to access the abstract of it. Only people who have subscription will get the full text. So that is another way if you want to publish in a high impact journal.
And I think just to conclude, because you are now doing research on AI, so use of AI for research, how practical or how ethical, and what are can you just give some tips, or maybe what resources one can use as a resident when they're just starting and they need help?
I guess AI is here to stay for good or for worse. But definitely, I mean, it is a very useful tool, but you should know where to stop. So where to stop would be, I mean, what you can use AI when you're writing a research paper is to maybe improve your language, because most of the times as Indians, we are not native English speakers. So English might not be a strong, we might not have a strong hold on it. So that is where you can use your AI for improving the conversation, to improve the uh, clarity. But definitely, we shouldn't use AI to generate the ideas. So, ideas should be original. You cannot copy a research. You cannot tell that, okay, I want to do a research on diabetic retinopathy. You tell me how to go about it. So, that wouldn't be the right way to go. And the problem with AI is it does something called as hallucination. It imagines things. If you tell that, okay, I'll ask a question to ChatGPT and tell what are the causes, what are the risk factors of diabetic retinopathy. So it will tell me A, B, C, D, and E, it will hallucinate. That means it will just make up things and tell you. And in fact, there is a disclaimer on ChatGPT which says very clearly that the content might not be correct. Don't ask for references. If it gives you references, also go back and check the references, because the references also could be hallucinated. So use it judiciously. It's a wonderful tool. There are tools which help you in reading the PDFs easily. So if you have to read 10 PDFs together, you can take help, but you cannot rely on whatever it says completely. So you have to know where to stop. So that is what I would like to say.
Do you use AI for your?
Yeah, I do use it for language modulation. So
Okay.
it does help, but not for creative content. You
Okay.
should never probably use it for generating ideas, or
Okay.
even as literature search. It's not a very good idea, or not a very good tool even to search literature.
Okay. So any particular this application which you may like to suggest?
Whatever is available, like ChatGPT, I think everyone uses that. There is a chat PDF which helps you in reading the PDFs. So if you want to particularly look, you have a long thesis there and you have uploaded and you want to look for one particular thing. So you can just search it on that, like, okay, just get me to the results section. So it will directly take you to the results section. But it's your duty to go and read that and not
Right.
just rely on what it is saying, because it could be just saying nonsense.
Yeah, because there are few which are designed like Scholarly and Copilot and Beerly, which one last question is, now in India we have certain what we can call is like maybe agencies who are not exactly commission based, but you pay them to help you publish.
Okay.
So earlier, like we used to pay the biostatistician. If
Mhm.
it was outsourced, it was if it was not there in the, yeah, now with Google and obviously AI, you don't need someone to calculate if you know which
Hmm.
test you need to use. But they are sort of counselors or whatever you want to call them. Uh, any your opinion, or have you heard or your
I've heard of these, but no practical experience, or I don't know
obviously?
anyone who has used it. But I don't know how it works. So does it work with them being the authors on the paper, or it is just a consultancy service? I'm not very sure about how it works. But I don't know if it is the right thing to do. If you should, you probably it's a good idea to take an opinion from someone, but I think finally you should do the work what you are doing. You should be the owner of the work what you are publishing. So it can't be someone else's. I mean, you just do the data collection and give it to someone, and someone designs the whole paper out of it. I don't think it is even legal to do that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because they are now and they're part of the what do you say the political system of ophthalmology in India, and they even for thesis. So there are a lot of research academies, and so and you can even for a single article also you can
Yes.
this. So that's what I generally tell that if you just make an effort and that rejection also is a sort of a great learning experience because you know what to do even if that thing doesn't go ahead, but for the next time you know how to go about, and it is just a you just have to make that step. It is not
Yes.
really like
Learning
an
process.
impossible task that you cannot do. It is just a bit of inertia and maybe lack of awareness and ignorance on our part. And if anyone has any question for Dr. Saujanya, I think we've troubled you enough, and we'll catch up once again. And thank you for sparing time, and best luck with all your research work.
Thank you, Dr. Anuj. I mean, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Okay.